Section: Introduction. In this section, we explore why neural networks shift between different modes of computation during training. This has been a topic of interest for many years in both artificial and biological neural networks. Recent studies on transformers have highlighted clear examples of these transitions, such as the shift from memorization to generalization when training transformers for modular arithmetic, and the opposite transition when training for in-context classification. We focus on a similar shift from generalization to memorization in transformers used for in-context linear regression. We create sequences with regression vectors sampled uniformly from a fixed set, which we refer to as task diversity. In this context, we find that fully trained transformers can behave like two distinct learning algorithms, one that memorizes the tasks and another that generalizes to new tasks. We introduce the concept of transient ridge, where for certain values of task diversity, the loss experienced by the transformer does not follow a straightforward pattern. Initially, the transformer seems to approach a generalizing solution before shifting towards a memorizing one. We delve deeper into this transient ridge phenomenon, replicating it and analyzing the function space trajectories of our transformers. This analysis reveals how generalization and memorization evolve and how task diversity influences these dynamics. We explain transient ridge as a balancing act between loss and complexity that changes throughout training, similar to Bayesian model selection. We validate this explanation by assessing the complexity of the competing solutions. Our findings enhance our understanding of transient ridge and emphasize the importance of the evolving loss-complexity trade-off in understanding similar phenomena. In the related work section, we review both empirical and theoretical studies on the emergence and temporary nature of computational structures in deep learning. We then introduce the in-context linear regression framework and the idealized solutions we are investigating. Next, we define a conditional distribution for sequences based on a latent regression vector, specifying the parameters we use for our dataset. We create a task distribution for various levels of task diversity, ensuring that the task sets are nested, which allows us to compare model behaviors effectively. Section Summary. In this section, we explore the phenomenon of transient ridge in transformers trained for in-context linear regression, where the model transitions between generalization and memorization strategies as task diversity varies. We analyze this behavior through joint trajectory principal component analysis and discuss how the evolving trade-off between loss and complexity influences these transitions. Section: Mean Squared Error Objective. In this section, we discuss the mean squared error objective. We denote a sequence as S and refer to the context subsequence as S with a label y_k. We define a function f that maps contexts to predicted labels. For a dataset represented as S_i, we establish the per-token empirical loss and average it over context lengths to obtain the overall empirical loss. The population loss, denoted as L, f, is determined by taking the expectation over the data distribution. For a function f implemented by a transformer with parameters w, we denote various losses as L_n, k, w, L_n, w, and L, w, and we use a superscript L_m for task diversity m. Next, we explore idealized in-context linear regression predictors. Given a context S, there are multiple algorithms available to predict y_k. We replicate the transient ridge phenomenon by training transformers across different task diversity parameters and evaluating their performance on out-of-distribution sequences. We apply joint trajectory PCA, using principal component analysis to break down the collective function space trajectories of the transformers, which gives us a simpler representation of their behavioral development. We find that the difference between DMMSE and ridge is related to the second principal component, showing that as we approach the task diversity threshold, the trajectories increasingly align with ridge. We train transformers on nested multi-task data distributions with varying task diversity under the mean squared error objective to observe when they approximate DMMSE or ridge. We utilize a two-layer transformer with approximately 2.65 million trainable parameters. We experiment with a range of task diversities from 1 to 32,768, including infinity. Each training run produces a trajectory through parameter space, from which we sample checkpoints using both linear and logarithmic intervals. We employ joint trajectory principal component analysis to study the development of structure and function in our transformer models. This method allows us to analyze the trajectories of all models in a finite-dimensional function space. Our methodology for this joint trajectory PCA is detailed. In our experimental results, we present out-of-distribution loss on a fixed test set and the outcomes of two-dimensional joint trajectory PCA, which explains 27.5% of the variance. We also provide in-distribution loss data and extend our analysis to four-dimensional PCA, examining the impact of checkpoint distributions and confirming that results remain consistent regardless of batch size. We model the transient ridge phenomenon as the transformer navigating a changing trade-off between loss and complexity during training. We draw on Bayesian internal model selection theory to predict this trade-off and validate it by measuring the complexity of fully trained transformers. Finally, we observe that many systems exhibit learning dynamics that transition from high-loss and low-complexity solutions to low-loss and high-complexity solutions. While this pattern has been studied in specific models, we lack comprehensive results for general deep learning. Therefore, we turn to singular learning theory, which examines statistical models with degenerate information geometry, to explore this loss-complexity trade-off in the context of Bayesian inference. Section Summary. In this section, we analyze the mean squared error objective for training transformers on multitask data with varying task diversity, exploring the transient ridge phenomenon through joint trajectory PCA to understand the behavioral dynamics of the models. We model the evolving trade-off between loss and complexity during training, drawing on Bayesian internal model selection theory and singular learning theory to validate our findings. Section: Bayesian internal model selection. In this section, we discuss Bayesian internal model selection. In Bayesian inference, we find that the solutions that the posterior focuses on are influenced by a balance between loss and complexity. As we gather more samples, this balance shifts from simpler, less accurate solutions to more complex, accurate ones. The main measure of complexity we consider is the local learning coefficient, which reflects the effective number of parameters while accounting for degeneracy. We explain the transient ridge phenomenon observed in transformers trained on diverse linear regression tasks. For low task diversity, we expect the parameters representing ridge solutions to have lower loss and complexity than those representing the DMMSE solution. Thus, training should directly target the DMMSE solution. With intermediate task diversity, we anticipate lower loss but higher complexity for the DMMSE solution compared to the ridge solution. Initially, training should focus on the ridge solution before shifting to the DMMSE solution after several training steps. For high task diversity, we expect the DMMSE solution to have slightly lower loss but significantly higher complexity, leading us to remain focused on the ridge solution by the end of training. We validate our explanation through experiments measuring loss and complexity for both solutions. Our findings suggest that the transient ridge phenomenon is influenced by an evolving trade-off between loss and complexity, resembling Bayesian internal model selection, though there are still gaps in our understanding that we aim to address in future work. We note that our analysis primarily considers in-distribution behavior, and it remains uncertain whether our transformers accurately approximate ideal predictors for all inputs. Additionally, we question whether the parameters that govern training dynamics are the same as those to which transformers ultimately converge. Future research could explore the practical solutions of transformers, potentially through mechanistic interpretability. We also acknowledge that we simplified our analysis by assuming lower-order terms cancel out. If they do not, their differences could affect the posterior log odds, particularly for small sample sizes. While these terms have been studied, they are not as well understood as the local learning coefficient, and we see potential for further exploration in this area. Our main focus is on neural network development rather than solely on Bayesian internal model selection. We provide evidence that loss and complexity play significant roles in a principle we call dynamic internal model selection, but the exact nature of this principle and the roles of loss and complexity still need clarification. We observe that Bayesian internal model selection suggests that ridge solutions should eventually transition to more complex DMMSE solutions. However, we notice a threshold of task diversity beyond which transformers tend to remain at the ridge solution. This could be due to various factors, such as capacity limits or differences between Bayesian and dynamic internal model selection. We leave this as an open question for future investigation. Finally, we highlight that the phenomenon of transitioning from a generalizing solution to a memorizing one has been observed in various sequence modeling contexts beyond our study. We also note the reverse transition from memorizing to a simpler generalizing solution, known as grokking. These phenomena present rich opportunities for future research into the principles that guide neural network development.